Hi, I'm Benn Stancil, and I'm going to talk today about the end of the data pipeline and what happens to all of this data that analytics engineers and data engineers spend so much time moving around. So a quick bit about myself. I'm one of the founders of Mode, which is a BI tool designed around data teams. Looks like this. It's a place for you to be able to do analysis in SQL, Python, R, and in visual analytics tools like this. I also yell about data stuff on the internet a lot. I have a blog. You can check it out here if you want to read more. So, but before all of this, before being involved in Mode and things like that, I worked at a company called Yammer. And so Yammer built a product that looked like this. It was a B2B SaaS tool that was basically Facebook for Work before Facebook for Work existed. And at Yammer, I had the role of a quantitative product analyst, which is basically a data analyst for the product team, where we had a pretty standard philosophy about how we worked and the things we were trying to get done. And so this is an actual slide from a presentation that we put together about how we worked. None of these ideas should be terribly foreign to anybody here. We wanted to solve problems, not just answer questions. We wanted to do it quickly. We wanted to appreciate trade-offs and uncertainty and kind of have some scientific rigor to the way we thought about data. And like most data teams, these ideas were kind of our guiding philosophies. And so we tried to solve a bunch of business problems with them and then ultimately present those results to decision makers who would, in theory, make decisions based on that data. And so as many of you probably experienced, that's not always how this happens. A lot of times we would present something, the data would say, hey, we should do this. And the person wouldn't listen to it, and they would do something else. And they would kind of act the way that this, like Jeff Bezos story says, where they'd actually go with the anecdotes. They'd have an anecdote or their gut would tell them to do something, and they'd come away actually acting on that rather than the data. And so I came away from this kind of believing that, hey, like business people don't use data because they don't understand it or because they don't care about it. And our jobs as data people, my job as an analyst, was to make sure they understood or cared. And so at some point down the road, I actually left that job to start Mode. And so when you do that, when you start a company, you can kind of make up whatever fancy title you like, which is what I did. And I also suddenly found myself in the position of as a executive stakeholder that I was basically serving previously. And so I was excited about that because it gave me the opportunity to be this kind of undercover agent. I was a data person, but I could kind of sneak into the executive ranks and finally run a company the way a data person would. And then, like, lo and behold, after some time, I actually became one of them. I started doing the same things that they used to do to me, ignoring the data and kind of trusting my gut or going with other instincts. And so after a bit of time of reflecting on this, I've come to 4 realizations as to what it is that makes leaders and business stakeholders think about data differently that's not at all obvious to how we think about it as data people. And so that's what I want to talk about today is what's it like to sit on that side of the table and what we as data folks can do because of that. So thing one, and this actually comes from early 2020 when the world looked like this. These were the early days of COVID when the economy was falling off a cliff. This is the same, obviously, for Mode. And so we're trying to figure out what to do. And so we created this giant daily dashboard that captured as much as we could about the state of the economy, the state of our company, and things like that. And this is a screenshot of that dashboard. And we use it to assess how things were going, like what changes we need to make and all those sorts of things. And as rich as this was, we didn't actually use it that much. And the reason for that was sort of, no matter how expansive we made this spreadsheet, it only captured a fraction of the things we actually needed to consider. So as some small examples, we had to think about the fact that employees were now working from home and they no longer were in the office. We had to think about the fact that a lot of employees who had kids suddenly had to figure out how to work with them at home rather than in schools. Some of our more experienced leadership also wanted to consider what previous crashes were like what it was like in 2008, or in some cases, what it was like in 2001. And so all of that context, from like the pandemic itself to all of this history, was really useful inputs in making decisions, even if it wasn't captured in our data. And so what I realized very acutely in that moment was, it's not that business people don't use data because they don't understand or care about it. It's because the things that they care and understand about aren't always captured in data. That to put it another way, they've often seen things that our data can't possibly imagine. And so that's the first realization is, as a data person, you have to figure out the context. Often when we think data is getting ignored, we're the ones actually ignoring that context that's just not in the data that we have. So second thing, when data folks talk about their roles a lot, they often use the analogy of a consultant, where our job is to kind of show up, ask a bunch of questions, and then put together recommendations in this kind of McKinsey style presentation, where we're the experts and we're here to help people be better at their jobs and make better decisions. And so I think this is a bad analogy. I think we should instead think of ourselves as detectives. We're not there to tell people what to do, but we're there to solve a problem. And like critically in this, detectives realize that they don't know more about the crime scene than the witnesses do. They never tell a witness they're wrong. If a witness says something that doesn't make sense or doesn't fit with their worldview, they might ask, like, why do you think that? What context do you have that makes you believe that? And so we should take the same approach. When someone's looking to make a decision that's different from what we think is right, our job isn't to immediately correct them, but to figure out why they believe that thing and why they believe that's the right thing to do. So this was the second realization, is we should act as detectives, not consultants. And this consultant analogy often kind of leads us astray. So third thing, not all of us have the privilege or sort of misfortune of being an executive and having to make these sorts of decisions, but we've all had the experience of deciding where to go to eat with a group of friends. And so if you think about the times that you've had to do this, there's like absolutely no shortage of data to help you do this. We've got Yelp and all the data that's there. We've got Google reviews and all the data there. We've got review sites and friends' recommendations and a bunch of other sources of data for where we might want to eat. And despite all of this, this is how a lot of us feel when we have to choose a restaurant. Like, it's funny because it's true. We don't want to do it. Like, there's some discomfort in actually choosing where to go with a group of friends. And I think this gets at a really key thing about making decisions, which is the hard part, it turns out, isn't doing the analysis or looking at all of the data. The hard part is actually making the choice. It's deciding between a few options that all could be pretty good, and you have nothing conclusively telling you which one is best. And so that's a huge difference between analysts and data folks and execs. In these cases, like, analysts can say, hey, we're looking at these different options. Which one is best? Well, it depends. Executives and business stakeholders have to say, I have to make a decision. It can't just depend. That you have to actually choose something here. And so this can be really hard, because even with something as simple as choosing a restaurant, the data is never going to tell you exactly what to do. And as a decision maker, ultimately, the success or failure of that decision rests on you. So as analysts, I think it's important for us to recognize this and recognize the difference between what we do, which is appreciate trade-offs and uncertainty, and what others are having to do, which is making trade-offs despite uncertainty. And so this is like the third lesson, I think, that's important for us to remember, is the decision is the hard part. It's very different to present facts and data to describe tough situations and give people that data to make those decisions, versus being the person who actually has to tell a bunch of people, this is what we're going to do in that tough situation. And so that's a very different sort of role, and I think it's important for us to remember that. So there is a way that we can help out with this, which brings me to the fourth and final lesson, which is that even when you don't have to make the decision, it's useful to share your opinion about what you would do. That when you present analysis, it's easy for us to present things like this, where we present a ton of data that can be interpreted in lots of different ways. Like, this is actually a real dashboard that I built during my time at Yammer. It was meant to help people understand which customer to call. There's a ton of information here, and it's very hard to digest. Very hard to know, like, what actually should I be doing with this? And similarly, when we share results and we describe like the data that we're looking at, we often tend to do it in this way. And so this is actually another thing that I created prior to working at Yammer. I actually worked in DC at a think tank. And so I had to write these kind of policy papers. And this little blurb was the way that I kind of sold one of these policy papers. But it's the entire thing is like full of caveats and hedges. And this is a way that we as analysts and data people often communicate, that contingent on the global economy's resilience, economic trends in Latin America appear favorable. In the medium term, a number of other structural challenges persist. Like, this whole thing is incredibly sort of hedged and has all of these kind of blur words in it that make it really hard to know what I actually think that policymakers should do. I mean, even like the title of this thing is a question. And so when I wrote this, I remember thinking this was right. This was the right way to do it, because it captured all the uncertainty in the data, captured the uncertainty of the analysis. And while that is useful, while it's helpful to point some of that stuff out, it leaves out one really important thing, which is, what would I do if I were the person who had to make this decision? If I couldn't just describe this choice, but I had to actually make it, which choice would I make? And so in this, I think, like, as data people, our job is to think like a player on the field. That while we have a coach who may know more stuff than we do, or may have context that we don't, and they may be the one that ultimately makes the decision, we also have to share the things that we see. We shouldn't just say, here's what we see. We should also say, here are the opinions that we have, and here's what we would do if you're in that position. And so I think, obviously, with a final note on that when we share these opinions, we shouldn't be a jerk about it. We shouldn't get upset when somebody disagrees with us or makes a decision that doesn't go with our opinion. But it's important for us to share it and us to put ourselves in their shoes, say, hey, here's what we would do if we had to make the decisions you had to make. And so that's kind of my fourth realization, is share your opinion. It may not always be acted upon, but it will always be appreciated by the folks who actually have to choose what to do with it. So with that, I'll stop, and thank you, everybody, for watching.